Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's such a pleasure to be here on behalf of Admiral Harry Harris, the Commander of the United States Pacific Command. He sincerely regrets not being here in person. He intended to be here, but due to the issues that our command is dealing with in another part of our area of operations in Northeast Asia, he physically could not be here, and I was asked to come and speak on his behalf. So I will be speaking his words, his ideas, and his thoughts this morning. I'd like to thank the India Foundation, the IOC Organizing Committee, and especially Sri Lankan Prime Minister Wickremesinghe as committee chair for extremely working hard and the tireless effort that was put into organizing and bringing all of us together here. And Pacific Command really appreciates being invited to this India-Ocean Conference. I'm sure there was a lot of work that went into it, and we really appreciate it. Pacific Command, a lot of people ask, why is a United States military command part of this committee, or not committee, part of this IOC conference? Pacific Command just celebrated its 70th anniversary last week. We organized as the United States Combatant Command 70 years ago, and our focus has been and continues to be on the Indo-Asia-Pacific region. We're responsible for all of the United States military activities in the Indo-Asia-Pacific region. And we have 375,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marine, Coast Guardsmen, and Department of Defense civilian employees that work together focused on that area. For our 70 years, our mission started and continues to be, and hasn't changed, to protect and defend the territory of the United States, our people, and our interests. And our mission has been to do that by promoting security cooperation with our allies and partners, by reinforcing rules-based international order, responding to contingencies and crisis in the area, deterring aggression, and when necessary, as a last resort, to fight. Our vision that Admiral Harris put into place a couple years ago when he came into command is that the Indo-Asia-Pacific region is stable, prosperous, and characterized by rule-based order within the United States as the premier security partner of choice. So it's about partnering, and that's why we're here today. In that context, in the inner and connected world, as that increases more and more through social access and cyber and other ways, as we connect ourselves closer and closer over time, there's many challenges that will require cooperative multilateral solutions. Forums like this help us all to dig deep and to analyze the issues that impact all of our nations collectively. Something especially needed in this day and age, in the age of instant news, short sound bites that simply touch the surface or scratch the actual issue. We need academics, leaders, diplomats, scholars, and military people to work and act together to dig deep and see what the solutions are for our problems. It should come as no surprise to anybody here that the Indian Ocean region occupies a position of immense strategic importance. All the speakers have talked about it. Admiral Harris and Pacific Command is acutely aware that today half of the world's container traffic, a third of the bulk transport cargo, and nearly 2/3 of global maritime traffic oil goes through these waters in the Indian Ocean. And from our military view, our military lens, the security implications attached to that level of commerce are enormous. The Indian Ocean region necessarily attracts geostrategic interest, both from states within and without the region. Two of the three largest economies in the world, China and Japan, along with many other nations, have vital vested interest in resources and trade that transits through the waters in the Indian Ocean. And this is a condition which has potential for simultaneous competition and cooperation. And that's why we need to talk and discuss and work on it together. It's worth noting the economies throughout the Indo-Asia-Pacific region continue to flourish because of the collective respect for and adherence to international rules and standards that have produced the longest era of peace and prosperity in modern times in this region. 70 years of sustained regional security and stability didn't just happen on its own. These conditions are not coincidental. Rather, they're a result of a commitment to a principled, rule-based international system which affords all nations, large or small, the opportunity to reap the collective rewards of cooperation. As U.S. Defense Secretary Mattis stated at the recent Shangri-La dialogues, The international order was not imposed on individual nations. Rather, the order is based on principles that were embraced by nations trying to create a better world and restore hope to all. These principles, which include freedom of navigation for military and civilian ships and aircraft, the peaceful resolution of disputes, the unimpeded lawful commerce, provide the foundation of a rule-based international order that has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty and benefited so many nations for the last 7 decades. The continued acceptance of this rule-based international system is being challenged, however, by some of the very nations that is most benefited. Unfortunately, some nations are choosing to reject the accepted frameworks of norms, standards, rules, and laws that are foundational, that have underpinned it, the international system, and the inclusive security network that supports it. Instead, some nations pursue a more self-serving path. We see this development in the South China Sea, amidst contested maritime claims and the contribution to decisions by an accepted international authority. China is using its military and economic power to dampen freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, and in turn erode rules-based international order. It seems readily apparent that the Chinese are building up combat power and positional advantage in an attempt to assert de facto sovereignty over disputed maritime features and spaces in the South China Sea. In so doing, they're fundamentally altering the physical and political landscape by creating and militarizing man-made bases, using tone-deaf propaganda at times to justify these unprovoked aggressions as measures intended for rescuing wayward fishermen. As Admiral Harris has said recently, fake islands should not be believed by real people. The results of this aggressive attempt to apply national laws in international space are unsurprising. Angst and uncertainty are on the rise, causing alarm among neighboring nations as we see ever larger portions of national wealth that are being transferred by claimants and non-claimants alike to develop more capable naval forces, far beyond what is needed for merely self-defense. As worrisome, the principle of unfettered access to the global commons is at risk when nations make unilateral claims of sovereignty over global commons. Small nations with fewer resources to draw upon and at a clear disadvantage in terms of military might and power have little recourse but to begrudgingly accept coercive demands and cede the rights that rightfully belong to all nations. How the collective concert of nations deals with freedom of navigation issues has an impact well beyond the maritime domain. If states are willing to treat control of international spaces as up for grabs at sea, there's little reason to consider that global commons within other domains like space or cyber are going to be any more protected. Accordingly, United States forces will continue to fly and sail and operate throughout the globe in accordance with international law to ensure that the privilege that's afforded to all nations is not superseded by the ambitions of just one. This is not to say that American and Chinese interests are locked in a spiral of escalation that will invariably lead to military clashes or conflict. That's not the case. On the contrary, our goal remains to work with and to convince China that its best future comes from peaceful cooperation, meaningful participation in a current rules-based international order, and honoring the international commitments it has made. But the United States will not allow shared domains to be closed down unilaterally. So Admiral Harris has stated, we'll cooperate where we can, but we must remain ready to confront when we have to. He also has stated, and always has emphasized, that we must not allow areas where China and the U.S. disagree to impact our ability to make progress on other areas where we do agree, and there's many of them. The United States, and in fact all of the Indo-Asia-Pacific nations, should try to cooperate with China where we can. And the basis of this cooperation should begin with and end with norms and international law. I only highlight the South China Sea example not because it has been prevalent in regional security discussions for years now, but also because of the contrast with what Admiral Harris sees as the prevailing approach of resolution of maritime disputes here in the Indian Ocean region. Many countries in this region, including India, have demonstrated a commitment to long-standing, customary international law. Prime Minister Modi of India has expressed that respecting freedom of navigation and adhering to international norms are essential for peace and economic growth in the interlinked geography of the Indo-Asia Pacific. More importantly, the example is being set right here in the Indian Ocean by actions as well as by words. In 2012, as an example, the International Tribunal for the Law of Sea decided a maritime border dispute between Bangladesh and Burma. The decision prevented Burma from cutting off Bangladesh from access to maritime resources due to its concave coastline. As a concession, the International Tribunal for the Law of Sea created a gray area that allowed Bangladesh claim to the seabed while Burma controlled the exclusive economic zone waters above. The ruling also limited St. Martin's Island off the coast of Burma to a territorial sea, preventing Bangladesh from bumping out its exclusive economic zone from an offshore island. Both sides benefited from this ruling. 2 years later, in 2014, the Permanent Court of Arbitration resolved a long-standing conflict or maritime border dispute between India and Bangladesh. At issue was the maritime border on Bangladesh's western border. In the court's decision, Bangladesh was awarded 80% of its claimed exclusive economic zone. Notably, India chose to abide by the ruling, despite being the much larger and much more powerful claimant. By displaying a willingness to use agreed-upon dispute resolution mechanisms and abide by decisions conferred, India is using its role in the region as a leader to increase regional security and stability, and to lay foundation for cooperation on other issues as well. That cooperation is key in an environment where collective challenges will require collective, inclusive solutions. The same ocean that connects us and provides immense opportunities for national prosperity and improved quality of life also provides openings for non-state actors to exploit their advantages. One such manifestation has been piracy. It's prevalent in several areas of the Indo-Asia Pacific, including here, obviously, in the Indian Ocean. For a long time, piracy and armed robbery in the western Indian Ocean disrupted the delivery of humanitarian aid to Somalia. It threatened the vital sea lines of communication and economic interests off the Horn of Africa and in the Gulf of Aden and in the Indian Ocean, costing governments in the shipping industry nearly an estimated $7 billion in 2012 alone. It took a collective response of maritime nations and their navies, along with adjustments in shipping industry practices and policies, and a United Nations Security Council resolution to help reduce this threat to a more manageable level. But piracy has been and continues to be an ongoing challenge on the world's oceans, particularly where seams of governance and maritime security exist. We can look to the eastern Indian Ocean for example of effective anti-piracy cooperation. The Strait of Malacca patrols, cooperatively undertaken by Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand, have helped to dramatically reduce the number of piracy incidents along that maritime choke point since its inception 12 years ago. As with many maritime challenges, however, the future success of anti-piracy efforts also depends on the conditions ashore that give rise to frictions at sea. Lawlessness, poverty, and humanitarian crises can create conditions in which piracy becomes an enticing option. Lawlessness ashore can also give rise to other challenges like terrorism that can impinge upon security conditions well beyond those shores where they originated from. We have no clearer example of this than that of ISIS, the so-called Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. While the main geographic focus of the US-led counter-ISIS coalition has rightfully been in the Middle East and North Africa, the ongoing military operations there continue to deny ISIS territory. We see radicalized and weaponized terrorists fleeing those areas and relocating, and in many cases returning back home to inspire new fighters where they came from, including Indo-Asia Pacific countries. Make no mistake, ISIS is a clear threat and must be defeated. Sadly, we're seeing the outsourcing of violent ideology come to fruition right now in the southern Philippines, where in 2016, Isn'Alan Hapalan, a commander of a local Abu Sayyaf group, was named the ISIS Emir of Southeast Asia. In just a matter of months, Hapalan started uniting elements of several violent extremist organizations, building a coalition under the ISIS black flag. These terrorists are using combat tactics that we've seen used in the Middle East to kill in the city of Marawi in Mindanao, Philippines right now, today. This being the first time an ISIS-inspired forces have banded together to fight on this kind of scale in the Indo-Asia Pacific. Ladies and gentlemen, Marawi needs to be a wake-up call for every nation in the Indo-Asia Pacific. Foreign fighters are passing their ideology, their resources, and methods back home to local, homegrown, next-generation radicals. We must stop ISIS and all violent extremist groups that are like them at the front end and not at the back end, when threat can become even more dangerous. But we cannot do it alone. Only through multinational collaboration can we work together to eradicate ISIS disease, which is supported and inspired by ISIS, here in the Indian Ocean Pacific area. We don't want it to spread any further than it already is. That's all bad news. The good news is that multinational efforts are underway to meet this challenge. Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines are deepening cooperation to fight regional piracy and related kidnapping for ransom in the Sulu Sea, as an example. Cooperative efforts in this vast and largely ungoverned maritime area connecting these three great nations and their islands of thousands of islands will help deny these terrorists maneuver space, recruiting opportunities, and revenue streams. This partnership, along with the Armed Forces of the Philippines' renewed offensive against the ISIS group in Marawi, is another step in the right direction. It's the good news. Cooperation between Singapore and Indonesia is yet another high point. Because of the coordination between these two nations, a plot by a terrorist cell with links to ISIS to conduct an attack in Singapore was just recently broken up by Indonesian security forces. It took cooperation, collaboration, intelligence sharing to stop something that would have been horrific if it had followed through. What I hope these examples highlight is the immense value of collective, cooperative, inclusive approaches, and how these are very important to all of us who are affected as nations, and how we can address some of the most pressing regional challenges together. Joint patrols, inclusive military exercises, and sustained engagements enhance our ability to work together to combat maritime piracy, to protect trade and shipping routes, to deter terrorists, and provide humanitarian assistance during natural disasters. The United States will continue to look for ways that we can cooperate in all these areas with all nations in the Indo-Asia-Pacific. This is a message that should resonate for all of us who are tasked with providing security upon which the continued stability and expanding prosperity of this region depend. I appreciate you listening and giving me time this morning. Thank you very much.